All right, welcome back to New Testament Survey. I want to continue our discussion about the religious and philosophical setting of the New Testament. And one of the things I want to touch on just very briefly in a short video here is the idea of Messianic expectation. The Jews in the time of Jesus, the Messianic fervor was at its height. There was a serious expectation for the Jews that their Messiah was soon to come. There was an expectation in the temple throughout the time of the Gospels that the Messiah would come, the anointed one, the King. His prophecies in the Old Testament, many of them interpreted by the rabbis to be that of a conquering king, a hero king, who would come and overthrow the Roman Empire, who would establish an independent Jewish state in Jerusalem and restore peace, prosperity, and Jewish predominance, not only in the region, but even throughout the whole world. And as the years went on, Josephus tells us, the Jewish historian tells us, that women would have an expectation that they would be the one to carry the Messiah. There were many would-be messiahs who would come to the temple year after year. We see this all throughout the Gospels when Jesus performs some act or when Jesus makes some claim. The people are asking, "Who are you? Under what authority do you do these things?" At the beginning of Jesus' ministry, they're asking him, "What is your sign? Are you the Messiah who is to come?" And so this Jewish expectation of a conquering king or hero Messiah that was going to come really ultimately ended up being dashed by Jesus's teachings and by his demeanor, and even the disciples themselves are seen to be downcast and scattered because of Jesus's imprison or his arrest and trials and then eventual crucifixion. They're hiding away in the upper room. Throughout the whole Gospels, they had been expecting the kingdom would come. The kingdom would be set up. They kept asking him, "So when are you going to set up your kingdom? When are you going to set up your kingdom?" And they were thinking very much in as an earthly kingdom. Now, the Jewish expectation for Messiah did not end with Jesus Christ. When Jesus the Christ, by the way, the word Christ is Greek Christos for the Hebrew word Messiah or Mashiach, which is anointed one, the one who would be king. They weren't simply dashed with Jesus coming and not being the Messiah they continued to seek, to continue to look for a Messiah. In fact, it's very likely that in the Gospel of John we're introduced to Barabbas. He's also mentioned in a couple of the other Gospels. And Pilate says, "Should I release to you Barabbas or this Jesus of Nazareth?" And John calls him in there some translations say a robber or a thief. But the word itself actually means someone who is an insurrectionist. And it's very likely that Barabbas himself, which his name means in Hebrew, son of the Father, which is kind of a rather odd name, son of my father, unless he's talking about the son of, that his name actually means son of God or son of the Father. And it's very likely Barabbas himself, as an insurrectionist, was himself a would-be Messiah, or someone who thought of himself as the Messiah. We see several times throughout this period would-be Messiahs. In fact, that's why the Romans had a fortress, the Antonine fortress, there on the Temple Mount, to quell any insurrections or would-be messiahs that would come and attempt to lead an uprising or a revolt against Rome. eventually, in 66 A.D., that very thing happened. The Jews came around a would-be Messiah who revolted against the Roman rule, and the city of Jerusalem was sieged. The temple itself was destroyed under General Titus. Without going into great detail, by 70 AD, the city of Jerusalem was completely destroyed, and the temple was completely destroyed by fire. Eventually, the Jews fled, and of course, this is depicted in, this is what's called the Arch of Titus in Rome, is a depiction of Titus bringing home some of the articles from the Jerusalem temple. You can see here the menorah, the table of showbread, and some of the other articles from the Jewish temple. But that wasn't the end of it. In 73 AD, just 3 years later, the fortress of Masada, which is just south and a little bit east of Jerusalem itself, was sieged, and to continue to quell this revolt. And what ends up happening here is that the Jewish men who were in the Masada fortress ended up committing suicide rather than allowing themselves to be taken captive or hostage. So much was their belief that they were following the Messiah. His name in this particular revolt was a guy by the name of Simon Bar Kokhba, and sometimes referred to as the Bar Kokhba Revolt, or the War of the Roman Jewish War, or the Jewish Revolt, or sometimes even the Great Revolt. This was the first Jewish revolt. Another revolt would take place in 135 AD, which was also put down fairly quickly. So as you can see, this fervor for a physical, earthly king who would overthrow the Roman Empire was so drastically important to Israel at the time when Jesus steps in, and it's the disenfranchisement of the Jews that Jesus was not the Messiah that they wanted. Instead, he was here to give himself as a sacrifice for their sins, so that he could come back someday and set up his kingdom. And we see that throughout the rest of the New Testament, that Jesus would come back to reestablish his kingdom in his second coming. So that's the idea of Jewish Messianic expectation in the New Testament.